So we're going to be in chapter 1, verse 12 today, but just a quick recap of what we've studied so far. We're continuing in Song of Songs. Solomon wrote this. It's called Song of Songs because it was the greatest song. He wrote 105 songs, 1 Kings tells us. And Song of Songs is kind of like the Lord of Lords or King of Kings. It was the best one he wrote. It's a romantic love story. Hallmark channel of the Bible, if you will, between Solomon and this girl from Shulam. Some call her, her name is Shulamite. Some say she is a Shulamite. But it's a lesson and a testament to God's design for marriage and relationships. And the central theme is love and the power of love. And Solomon compares it at the end of the book to death, and fire, rivers, and a massive wealth. And we can see those are very, in our earthly world, those are very powerful things. But God made love. God is love. It is His design and His gift. And we're most successful when we follow His rules. And we can see examples when we don't follow His rules, things don't work out very good. And I gave a few handouts, and we showed the Bible Project drawing and how that gives us a nice overview of the book. We talked about the chiasm that's present in the frames that point to the central verses where they consummate their marriage. And I invite you to review that and look at that and see if you agree that there is this Hebrew poetry technique of using a chiasm. Then we handed out the outline, and basically Chuck Swindoll outlines it where we have the courtship through chapter 3, and then we have the wedding, and then the maturing marriage in chapter 5 through 8. Throughout the book, there's a lot of references to garden imagery. We'll see more of that today. And that points us back to the Garden of Eden, where God made Adam and Eve and built them a garden, built them a place to live, and things were perfect. They were made for each other, and the garden was made for them. And we know what happened there. They corrupted that. But that was God's design, and our marriage relationships are a symbol still of God's design. Last week we dove into the details of chapter 1, and we see that the lady, the young woman, is the main voice speaking. And immediately we see the attraction that's growing between them. She begins by saying, I want his kisses. And this past Valentine's Day, last Monday was Valentine's Day, I was in Prima picking up something, and at the cashier they had this little love meter thing. And there was 4 settings. One of them was, I prefer my pets. The next one was, I guess you'll do. The third one was, hugs and kisses, XOXO. And then the fourth one was, be mine. And so if the Shulamite woman was to turn that on, she would say, be mine, because she began by saying, verse 1, let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. And then in verse 4, take me away with you, let us hurry, let the king bring me into his chamber. So immediately we're into the physical attraction between the Shulamite woman and Solomon. And this continues through the rest of chapter 1. But then we learned about her insecurity. She said, I'm lovely, but I'm dark. And she's dark because her skin is tanned from working in the vineyards. And we learned that in verse 6. And then we left off in verse 12 after he called him a mare. And now she responds to that. So I'll begin reading in verse 12. It says, while the king was at his table, my perfume spread its fragrance. My beloved is to me a sachet of myrrh, resting between my breasts. My beloved is to me a cluster of henna blossoms from the vineyards of En-Gedi. How beautiful you are, my darling. Oh, how beautiful your eyes are doves. How handsome you are, my beloved. Oh, how charming, and our bed is verdant. The beams of our house are cedars. Our rafters are firs. And so she begins by referring to the king at his table. Maybe they were in his palace at a large table. Some translations say couch. But anyway, she was referring to fragrances and comparing him to fragrances. You know, we use cologne and perfume in our culture, and why do we do that? What's the purpose of it?
Cover up stink.
Cover up stink, yeah. You know, especially in their time, they didn't take baths regularly, and they didn't have deodorant and all that, so they wanted to smell fresh and good and all that. But you know, when I put on cologne, I don't really smell it, you know. So, but I put it on because I think my wife will smell it, and she'll think it'll smell good, and when she smells that, she'll think of me. But yes, in their culture, it was very much a form of deodorizing or covering up body odor, but there was a kind of like we do with perfume and fragrances and cologne. We want to smell good for our beloved, and who knows that a scent, a smell, can really trigger powerful emotions. You know, it brings back memories immediately, especially if it's a nice smell and a nice memory. It triggers it immediately. There's a perfume that I love that I would love to buy from Misty, but I don't know the name of it. And anytime I smell it, I hate to go ask the lady that's wearing it, what perfume are you wearing? Because I think that's probably weird. But one of these days, I'm going to get the nerve to figure this out. But I really love the way it smells. And these fragrances she's talking about, this henna and this myrrh, they were not cheap. You know, they were many of them imported. Myrrh was from a small tree, a thorny tree in Arabia and India. It was a gum resin that come from that. And it was traded internationally. It was used for perfume and incense and also medicine. Henna was from a bushy tree, like a shrub. And it was an orange-red dye that they could use to color their hair, their hands, or their feet. And its blossoms were fragrant, and they used it for perfumes way back 1500 BC. And so thinking of these fragrances, you know, they were expensive, so it makes you think that she was in the presence of royalty, being able to afford these. So it gives further confidence that Solomon is the one who wrote this, but it also brings to mind the source of these fragrances, the trees, the shrubs. They were from a garden, possibly. And so let's talk about the garden imagery. In verse 16, it says, our bed is verdant. I don't use the word verdant very often, so I had to look it up. And the New Living Translation says, the soft grass is our bed. And the New King James says, our bed is green. So that makes me think they're on the grass somewhere, maybe having a picnic. They're out in the fields, they're enjoying a nice afternoon in the sun and the picnic. But then they said, he talks about the beams of our house are cedars and our rafters are firs. And so this actually could have been a canopy of trees in a nice little picnic spot that they had chosen. Some say no, these were fine woods imported to build the king's palace, and so this was another emblem of royalty. But I like the setting of a picnic because they're courting. They're doing things together. They're spending time together. You know, we'll see later in the chapter 2 that they go on a walk in the springtime. So I like to think of these as their early dates when they're out in nature and enjoying things together. And again, this imagery of the garden and spending time around trees and fragrances, it's pointing us back to the Garden of Eden, where God established the marriage relationship. And He set it in this beautiful place, and you had the garden was probably very fragrant. You know, when you visit botanical gardens or a zoological park, you know, you smell the fragrances and things like that. Imagine being in the Garden of Eden where God created it for them, and imagine it was beautiful, but it was also stimulating to all the senses, including our smell. And so we love with our sight, we love with our smell. You know, God created us these human beings with 5 senses, and I think He intends for us to be to love with those 5 senses. And then he goes on and says, or at least my translation attributes this to him, It says, "How beautiful you are, my darling. Oh, how beautiful your eyes are doves." And again, their figurative language here is hard to understand because we don't use this kind of symbology when we talk, but trying to understand what he means by doves. Maybe they were sitting in this garden area with trees. Maybe there were doves in the trees, and he said, "Oh, your eyes remind me of doves." But eyes are so important to our interaction with people and the looks of people. And women, they accentuate the eyes with makeups. In my job, our goal is to make mannequins. I think most of you know that, but our goal is to make them as realistic as possible. And one of the things I've noticed is the eyes are so important to making a mannequin look lifelike. And, the more realistic you can get the color of the pupil, and we even have eyeballs that dilate, so that they can shine a light on it. But the more realistic looking that is, the more that mannequin looks like a real person, which is our goal sometimes. And we know that when we interact with people. When you talk to somebody with sunglasses, it's really hard to connect. People talk with their eyes. And I can get in trouble sometimes for not saying a word because my eyes said what I was thinking, and I didn't intend to say it, but I get in trouble because your eyes say something, your body language says something. And so when we connect with people, there's something about the eyes that are important. And somebody has said that the eye is a light into the soul. When you look into somebody's eyes, you can really tell a lot about them. And so he says her eyes are dove. And what I've learned about dove in this past week is that dove are only able to focus on one thing at a time. Their eyes are like that. And doves mate for life. And so Solomon was probably saying that she has only eyes for me. Her eyes are doves for me. She loves only me. We're a pair for life. She only looks at me and not the other men, the other young men. So that's a nice compliment, but it also was something that made him feel good. And when you think of doves, and pairs of doves especially, what do you think of? What is dove a symbol for? Peace, yeah. And so, and a pair of doves would indicate a peace between friends, a friendship or a love. And so he's thinking of her as a dove, and it's just an emblem of their relationship, the love and peace they have, but also the attraction, the singular attraction between them that they're sharing. And so Solomon felt this singular devoted love from this young woman expressed through her eyes. And so their conversation continues in chapter 2. She begins in verse 1 by saying, "I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys." And then he responds, "Like a lily among thorns is my darling among the young women." And so they're continuing this interchange, these words of affirmation. And, they're in love, and they're telling, they're very vocal about what they think about each other and these words of affection. And if you've read the 5 love languages, words of affirmation is one of those things. And, your spouse's love language is words of affirmation. This is a good example of how to lift up your partner there and tell them how you love them in the ways that they understand. But I'm sure everybody loves to hear words of affirmation, and they're doing that here. And as she compares herself here to the rose of Sharon or a lily of the valley, these were wildflowers. They occurred naturally in Israel. Sharon was a fertile coastal plain south of Mount Carmel that would have been on the coast, kind of north and west of Jerusalem. But a couple of different understandings of what she may be meaning here. One says, if you saw a flower in the field, it might be by itself. So she might be saying, well, I feel a little bit out of place. I'm a country girl living in the king's, or coming and visiting the king's palace in the king's court. So she might have felt a little bit out of place. We saw that when she says, I'm dark. She was saying, don't judge me, don't look at me. So maybe she felt a little uncomfortable. Or she might have just been saying, hey, I'm just a common wildflower. They're pretty, but they're plentiful. And so I'm just another one of these. And he responds to her. And let me finish my thought about what she's thinking. Maybe she says, I am one of many, just another girl. But then he responds, and he says, he agrees, she's a lily. And lilies are pretty and beautiful, and they're a theme at weddings often. But he says she's a lily in what? Thorns. You're a lily among thorns. So what he's saying is, yes, you are a lily, you're beautiful, but you stand out against all the thorns in the field. And so her beauty was remarkable compared to the other women, and the other women were undesirable compared to her by comparison. And so he maybe took her statement of commonality and turned it into a huge compliment, saying that he was attracted only to her because she is a lily that stood out amongst the thorns. And then she responds to this compliment in verse 3. She says, like an apple tree among the trees of the forest is my beloved among the young men. I delight to sit in his shade, and his fruit is sweet to my taste. Let him lead me to the banquet hall, and let his banner over me be love. Strengthen me with raisins, refresh me with apples, for I am faint with love. His left arm is under my head, and his right arm embraces me. Daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you, by the gazelles and by the does of the field, do not arouse love or awaken it until it so desires. And so she returns his compliment. She was like a lily among the thorns. He is like an apple tree in the forest. I would guess that apple trees aren't that plentiful. So he stood out among the young men of the land. So they're trading compliments and affirmations here, and that's a very, very healthy thing. But the one thing that stands out in these compliments is how they have eyes for only one another, this exclusiveness in their relationship. And that's a key component of God's design for marriage. Husbands and wives reserve themselves and set themselves apart. That's the promise we make when we take our wedding vows, is to take our wife or husband only, with no other. And we know that when that's violated, when that exclusiveness is violated, the relationship takes a huge step backwards, and sometimes it's hard to overcome that. And so we see that this singularity of focus, this exclusive in devotion, is key to their relationship, but it's key to ours as well. And that's God's design. A man shall leave his wife and mother and be united. He'll leave his mom and father and be united with his wife. And what God has joined together, let no one bring apart. And so she was like a lily among thorns, and he was like an apple tree of the forest, and she had dove eyes only for him. So there's this oneness, this attraction, this exclusiveness between them. And just we've said that the relationships that is on display here as an illustration can also be used for us to learn about our relationship with our Heavenly Father. And I think the exclusiveness we talk about is also important with God. He commanded, you shall have no other God before me. He's a jealous God, jealous in a good way. Like, he doesn't want us worshiping any other God. But it's more personal than that. He wants our devotion. He wants our attention, our respect, our obedience. Much like Solomon and Shulamite here were, that they enjoyed the attention of each other, and they were telling each other so, and they stood out to each other, and they wanted that reciprocation. That's part of the relationship. God wants the same thing. He wants our attention. He wants our affirmation. He wants us to reciprocate the attention He's given us. And I tried to give this message a couple of weeks ago in the call to the table, but since then I ran across this quote from C.S. Lewis, and I think it nails the thought. It says, God, He died not for men, but for each man. If each man had been the only man made, he would have done no less. And so I think that perfectly sums up God's relationship with us. It's an individual. He died for me. He died for you individually. If we were the only human created, God would have still died for you. And that's personal. And God loves us that much. And if we were the only ones, he would have still sent his son for us. And that's an amazing thought, an amazing love relationship. So God wants us to reciprocate that and be attentive to him and have a relationship with him. And I think we'll find that as our relationship with him grows, so does our earthly relationships. I've seen it described as a triangle, with the man and wife in the lower corners and God at the apex, and the closer we get to God, the closer we get to other. And I think that's a good illustration. Another illustration that I've ran across about our earthly relationships is, imagine a person looking for a mate is like running on a track. And I am completely guilty of what I'm about to describe, or I was. The track, imagine, is our personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And the goal of the race is to become more like Christ. And so we're running this race, trying to be like Christ. And as we run, we see others running. And they run along with us. And we may see, hey, after a while, there's somebody running the race alongside us. And we say, let's run a lap or two together and see how it goes. And then after a while, they're running the same race, the race for Christ. So why don't we just run the race together forever? And so that describes courting and dating and then deciding that you found a running mate to run forever and get married. But the mistake I made was finding a mate was the race. And the race I was running was to find a wife. And so the point this example is making is, the race that you're running is to please God, to grow and become more like Jesus. If the race you're running is to find a mate, you're missing the point. So we must run the race to please God, and then along the way, he'll send a running mate with you that's running the same race you are, and that mate will come along naturally. And so I learned this the hard way, and I would hope to teach our young children that the race should be run against to find our way to God and be more like him. And so I think it's important in our relationships today, even if you're married now, you're still running this race. And I think it's important that we run the race together. We run the same race. We run the race at the same pace and help each other out. If one person is running faster and lapping the other one, that's it's a little bit hard to do that together. And so dating couples obviously should pay close attention to this, but married couples, I think, think about this. Run your race together, attend church together, Bible school together, do your study and pray time together. And I think I can do a better job of that. If not, your pace and race may be different, and that could fatigue your relationship. So, good words of wisdom from this illustration. The apple tree, she continues with this metaphor of the apple tree, and it's describing her passion for him. She wants to sit in his shade. Shade, I think, means a metaphor for protection. So a nice shade tree is welcome when the sun is hot, and she's under his. And then she compares this to Solomon taken to a great banquet or a feast, and by escorting her to this banquet, he's making their relationship public. If you were dating somebody and they never wanted to go be seen with you in public or take you to meet their family, that would be a huge warning sign, wouldn't it? And so he is proud of her. He's displaying her publicly at this banquet, and she says it's as if he printed a banner that said, I love you. His banner over me is love. And he's public with that and not ashamed of her at all. So under this banner, under this shade, she feels safe. She feels protected physically. She feels safe emotionally. She can be vulnerable with him and tell him how she thinks, and they're not shy at all about exchanging their feelings for one another. And so this is a very intimate relationship. And you know, if you're in a relationship that's not safe physically and not safe emotionally, it's going to be hard to be intimate with that person. And so we have to guard our emotions and make sure we're healthy there to have a good relationship. And verses 5 through 6 again describe her physical attraction. She's desiring to taste the fruit, the apples and raisins. She's describing a posture. His left arm is under her head and his right arm is embracing her. That's a hug or an embrace, or you know, if her head, his hand was under her head, maybe they were in a laying position. And so this is a very, very intimate, physically intimate position. And so she is, in verse 2, she asked for a kiss, and now she's asking for an embrace. And so their physical relationship is escalating, it seems. And this may be what leads to her statement in verse 7. There's a warning. She says, "Daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you by the gazelles and by the does, do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires." And so we see the physical intimacy escalating, and she realizes the power of this, and she warns her friends about this. And I think in a dating relationship, we have to teach our children, you know, we've got to be careful. Don't let the physical attraction outrun the emotional and spiritual maturity. If you do, you know, you're setting the relationship up for problems, because once it escalates, it's not, after the embrace, they're not going to return to just the kisses. You know, she's once it escalates, there's no turning back. And so she's telling her friends to, you know, not get too physically intimate before you're married until the time is right. And I think by her saying this, I think she's indicating that their relationship is maturing and it's heightening and escalating, but it's still restrained physically at this point. And you know, several things you read say, well, are they married? You know, she wants the king to take him into his chambers, and now we're talking about eating the fruit from the apple tree. Are they married, or is this a love relationship? And I think, my opinion, and I think many scholars say this is absolutely a marriage relationship, and the physical side is there's attraction, but there's restraint until the consummation we'll see in chapter 3 and 4. But God would not put a book about marriage in the Bible if it wasn't per His standards. So I think we can take confidence that this is a courting relationship. At this point, it's escalating and growing and maturing into a marriage relationship, and then there will be a wedding and a mature marriage after that. And so I think this also, this warning she gives to the daughters of Jerusalem, I think it highlights too our society and how it's cheapened physical intimacy and turned it into something very casual. It's robbed, I think, God's design there. And so we have to teach our children. I think it's easy for our kids to get confused because of all the messages they hear on radio and TV and the internet and their friends talking in school and what they teach. You know, we're so plural in what we say, trying to give everybody's point of view. We don't really able to teach the children what God says, and that's the job of the church, I think, in today's society. So, but it's a hard topic to talk about. You know, Misty does a better job than I do, but trying to help our kids understand God's design for marriage. But in the church, you know, the church could step up and do this. And but it's a hard topic to cover with children and teenagers especially. So, and I think the lesson we can have here too with as married couples and mature relationships is to make sure relationships are balanced. You know, the physical comes natural, but it seems like the emotional and spiritual we got to work a little bit harder at. And you know, I think that's a challenge for us to make sure we take the time to talk and listen, to spend time together, to share our inner thoughts and explore those things. And we're all busy. We all have phones to look at and things to learn and people to catch up with on Facebook and television to watch and movies to stream. And now that when I was a kid, you'd watch a show and then you'd have to wait a week for the next show, right? And now you can binge watch a whole series on Netflix, and man, that'll just consume your time at work and kill kids' activities and things. It's a challenge to make time for our relationships and especially emotionally to spend time. And then the same warning, I think, is present for the spiritual. Spending time. We need to have individual spiritual lives, but as couples, we need to share together as well. And again, I think I can improve in that area greatly. Worship and study and prayer together should be a priority. And don't we know that Satan will try to thwart our relationships? If you're sitting here and you're probably on Satan's radar. People that slept in this morning, Satan's probably not too worried about. But if you're a Christian and you're coming to church and he's going to put obstacles in our way and putting them cracks in a marriage relationship, that's one of his tools and his methods of operation. And so we have to defend against Satan through our spiritual intimacy with our spouse. And we have to be careful with that. So. Any thoughts or questions? Move on to chapter 2, verse 8. I don't want to do all the talking. Let's move on in verse 8. It says, "Listen, my beloved, look, here he comes, leaping across the mountains, bounding over the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Look, there he stands behind our wall, gazing through the windows, peering through the lattice. My beloved spoke, and he said to me, Arise, my darling, my beautiful one. Come with me. See, the winter is past, the rains are over and gone. Flowers appear on the earth, the season of singing has come, the cooling of doves is heard in our land. The fig tree forms its early fruit, the blossoming vines spread their fragrance. Arise, come, my darling, my beautiful one, come with me. My dove, in the clefts of the rock and in the hiding places on the mountainside, show me your face. Let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet and your face is lovely. Catch for us the foxes, the little foxes that ruin their vineyards, our vineyards that are in bloom. My beloved is mine and I am his. He browses among the lilies until the day breaks and the shadows flee. Turn, my beloved, and be like a gazelle or like a young stag on the rugged hills." And so this verse 8 here seems to begin another scene, maybe another date where he comes to her house and peers through the lattice and says, "Wake up, let's go outside, spring is here." He says the winter is past, the rains are gone, the season is coming, the doves can be heard, the fig trees starting to produce its fruit, the vines are blooming. So this sounds like springtime, doesn't it? And he wants to take a walk and enjoy the blooming flowers and the green grass, and I'm kind of looking forward to that. After last year's snowstorm, and I don't like cold weather anymore, and I'm ready for, much as I've enjoyed the break from mowing, I'm looking forward to the green grass and the flowers and the blooms, and I'm ready for that. And here they're experiencing spring and their exciting and new relationship, and spring is an emblem of that, isn't it? It just, nature bursts forth and blooms, and their relationship is budding and blooming. And this reminded me of a Chris Young song called "An Old Love Feels New." So this is the chorus. "That's how you know when it grabs a hold of you and won't let go, when you feel like she's always been in your soul, and as time goes by she's still surprising you. That's how you know it's true, when a new love feels old and an old love feels new." So for them, this was a new love, and it was fun and exciting, but when it feels right, it also feels a little old, doesn't it? It feels like you've been friends for a while. It feels like you're a fit. You're Legos. You just match up and go together, But then an old love, when it still feels new, that's a sign of God's stamp on the relationship. When you've been together for 20-something years or 40-something years and you still like each other, and you still find things together that are fun and exciting, that's God's mark on a relationship. So they were experiencing a new love, and we know that this can, we're made to be in a relationship. God made us that way, and when we find that person God has intended for us, it just fits, and we feel that longing of our soul is met, and it's old love can also be exciting and like new when we nurture it the way God intended. And one of those things we got to look out for are the problems. And in verse 15 here, Solomon says, "Catch for us the foxes, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards." So foxes, if they got in the vineyards, they could have dug around the roots and destroyed the vines, or they could have ate all the fruit off the vine, but they would have been a problem for the vineyard and the wine keeper. Kind of like hogs in Coryell County, they can tear up a field overnight just rooting around and all of that. So they're comparing these foxes in the vineyard to problems in a relationship, some commentaries said. So, things that can hurt a relationship. And we're not talking about the big things. And I think Chuck Swindoll made a good point. He said the large foxes, we handle those pretty good. We see them coming. If there's a death in the family or a job loss or things that, a long absence or an illness, we know we're supposed to come together and handle those as partners in a family. But it's the small things that kind of chip away day by day, the irritations, the frustration. These are the little foxes, So the things that irritate you, annoy you, frustrate you, anger you, sadden you, grieve you, those things that are just naturally happening and all of that. And so, I think some things I've learned not to do is being too critical or being too easily angered or not being overbearing. I think I told the story the first week when we first got married. I thought my job was to teach Misty to turn the lights off. And so I was raised where if you wasn't using the light, you turned it off. So I thought my job was to teach her, hey, these lights are not being used. We need to turn them off. And then after a while of kind of being a little critical and trying to teach her, and the lights still weren't getting shut off, I finally figured out what it cost to burn a light all day, all month, all year, and I decided that, that's not worth getting a divorce over, whatever it was, $5 to $10 a month. It's like, that's not a big deal. So God taught me that it's her job to turn the lights on, and it's my job to turn them off. So we've come to an understanding there. But can't be overly critical or overbearing, and but everybody has their own examples. The one I always heard growing up was the toothpaste on the lid. Do they leave the cap off the toothpaste? And growing up, I thought, what big deal is that? I don't care if they leave the toothpaste off. But that was a metaphor for anything that irritates you, saddens you, or whatever. It can become a problem, and you got to put that out in a relationship. And then that leads to oneness, or if you don't take care of those things, it leads to divisiveness. But oneness is God's design. And I think verse 16 there again summarizes what the relationship is all about. And she says, "My beloved is mine and I am his." And that pretty much sums up what God has designed for marriage. It's me plus me is equal to we. And 1 plus 1 is greater than 2. And the emblem of this is a unity candle in our marriages and weddings. And the two cease to become one, and they cease to become individuals, and they join together and become one couple. And verse 17, again, I think is a metaphor. Until the day breaks and the shadow flee, turn my beloved, be like a gazelle or a young stag on the rugged hills. And I think this is looking forward to their wedding day and inviting him to enjoy the physical intimacy of a marriage relationship. So, and I've shared several times the things to me that come out in our world that just say and scream, there is a God. And we've talked about our human bodies and how intricate they are. We've talked about the solar system. We've talked about nature and once, the changing of the seasons in spring. It just screams, there's a designer, there's a God. I would like to add relationships to that list. because I think, you know, the power, we see the power of relationships, and we see the longing for relationships, and it's by God's design. God created it. Clearly, man and woman were designed to be in a relationship. God said, He made man, and He said it's not good that he be alone, and He made woman for man. And so that's God's design. It's designed by God, it's given by God, it's a gift, it's a blessing. And, you know, when we treat it that way and nurture it the way God intended, it can be a huge joy and blessing in our life. And so I think it's just an amazing design that I had never really considered, you know, as examples of our divine Creator until now. So that's all I have today. Anybody have anything to add or questions?